What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, August 23rd, 2017, getting toward the end of the month here, getting toward the end of summer. Middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another crazy weekend of what are they going to do next. And it's anybody's guess. It's like, it's a box of Cracker Jacks. You open it up, and you're going to get a little prize. You don't know what it is, but you know it's coming. It's definitely on its way here. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And I think at this point, it's very obvious that we have yet another in a long series of war presidents. President Trump, the war president. He's out there, he's escalating the wars, cranking them on up, and just going on out and just, I don't know, maybe it's like a kid who has not been trained in the safe handling of firearms, and he finds a gun and he just gets, you know, just energized by the sense of power it has. And maybe the same thing's going on with presidents. No matter how peaceful they are, all of a sudden they got the keys to the nuclear weapons and they just almost can't resist the urge to want to go on out and blow something up. But a lot of people, a lot of Trump supporters are feeling completely betrayed by Donald Trump. And they're seeing, again, as Eisenhower warned, the military-industrial complex is really running the show here in the United States of America. People are very upset about that. And despite Donald Trump's criticism of the war in Afghanistan and his election promise to get us on out of there, and by the way, Obama made the same promise, and he didn't keep it either. But we're back to the idea of an endless war in Afghanistan. We've been there 16 years, the longest war in U.S. history, and there is no end in sight. And they're talking about sending in thousands and thousands of paratroopers. The U.S. is walking into the same mistake the Soviet Union did, the same mistake Great Britain did. And I think the main reason they're doing it, yes, there's the oil and gas pipeline, yes, there's the opium, and yes, there's the mineral wealth of the country, but I think it's really a case of not wanting to lose any of these wars, or it'll take the momentum out of the entire campaign to dollarifize the entire world. Now, there's a very bizarre story that came on out from antiwar.com, where apparently General H.R. McMaster, who was fully on board, we got to go into Afghanistan, managed to persuade Donald Trump that, yes, we should go back on in and escalate by showing him a photograph from 1972 of Afghan women wearing miniskirts walking through Kabul to show him that Western norms had existed there in Afghanistan before and could return. Now, that is an utterly ridiculous argument on a couple of levels. First and foremost, Western norms have got nothing to do with Afghan norms. And it's yet another indication of U.S. government arrogance that we are somehow obligated to go around the world and have them live their lives the way that we do. Out of control consumerism, out of control debt, rigged elections. I mean, anybody looking at how life is going on in this country right now understands that the United States government needs to clean up their mess here before they dare presume any moral authority to go to other countries and say, you should live the way that we do. Especially when you look at all the rioting and chaos in the streets, the tearing down of monuments and statues, the complete abandonment of civility. We're not a model for any other nation on earth right now. We haven't been for quite some time. And for McMaster to go on out there and say, we couldn't bring Western norms back to Afghanistan. What did those people ever do to us? But it's bizarre. And if this story is true, and I don't have any confirmation on it, it really does tell me that Donald Trump is not really thinking these things all the way through. He's listening to his advisors, and he's getting bad advice from his advisors. Now, according to Eric Prince, McMaster wanted to send no less than 70,000 troops into Afghanistan. They just want to go on in and just hammer it flat to prove that we are still butch. And even Eric Prince, who his business is all in mercenary armies, is saying, this is not going to work. The Pentagon is refusing to adapt to the realities in Afghanistan. They're trying to fight the war in Afghanistan by the same formulas that have worked in, shall we say, flatter regions. And that's why we've been in Afghanistan for 16 years. It doesn't work. They're not learning and adapting and thinking. They're just reading the old manual and saying, well, we're going to do this again. Yep, 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 yep. Meanwhile, the European Union has decided they're going to pour in $118 million in aid to support reforms in Afghanistan, which is a polite word for, we're going to give you a new Western puppet rulers. Now, the Taliban is already replying back and saying that they will turn Afghanistan into a graveyard for the United States, and that is a specific reference to Afghanistan's historical reputation of being a graveyard for empires. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And you know, here is the irony of all of this stuff. Because right after the U.S. invaded Afghanistan originally, 16 years ago, the Taliban tried to surrender. And the U.S. turned them down. Because they wanted to have a war. They wanted to have yet another battlefield to drop weapons on and soak the American taxpayer to replace them. It's like the end of World War II when Japan was trying to surrender, repeatedly trying to surrender. And they said, we reject your terms of surrender, we're going to drop the nuclear bombs. And then they wound up, basically, the Japanese surrender was on the original terms. Unconditional, except they kept the emperor. That was it. And the U.S. finally agreed to it after dropping the nuclear weapons here. All right, let's take some phone calls. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how are you today?
Well, I'm hanging in there.
All right, well, I was wondering, this buildup in Afghanistan, do you think that's a disguise to pull our troops out? I'm kind of thinking that it is.
Well, it may be a big bluff because we're still hearing talk about getting the Taliban back to the negotiating table. But again, that's going to be very, very difficult to do in light of recent history, that every nation that has gone to the negotiating table with the United States has, complied with the agreements made with the United States, only have the United States come on back at them. Syria, good example. Assad surrendered all their chemical weapons. The U.S. still trying to invade in there. Iran, P5+1 deal, fully in compliance, and already Nikki Haley's up there trying to find a way to wreck it so that they can invade. Why would the Taliban, or for that matter, anybody else on planet Earth, sit down at a negotiating table with the United States, knowing that the United States never keeps their commitments?
Good point. But I'm wondering, like think of you moving. You get a moving truck, you get a bunch of people to help you. It looks like a buildup, but actually you're getting out. And I wonder if we're not even going to go to the negotiating table and just withdraw all of our troops at one time.
Well, I think basically a big part of the agenda is not looking like they're losing, because there had been a lot of press over the last couple of months saying we might as well get out of Afghanistan. We're losing this one. And for the war agenda to keep moving forward, there cannot be a defeat visible to the American people. Afghanistan may continue to be a standoff for another 16 years, but at least they'll be able to say, well, we didn't really lose that one, while they go on into Iran and North Korea and China. Again, from the point of view of the military, it's all about image, and we have to be victorious, and we don't care how much of other people's money we spend and how many of other people's children get killed and crippled. That's not our concern. It's victory or death.
I agree. I know the optics look bad, but I wonder, let's bite the bullet and just pull out and take our losses, lick our wounds, and, fight a war that actually means something.
Well, if we were just fighting in Afghanistan, I would say that, yeah, it's definitely time to pull on out. But when you look at the larger picture of this plan of conquering all the world's resource-rich areas, again, the first defeat will be the last one. The wheels will come off the war wagon. The American people are going to say, all right, we're losing these things. Now's a good time to quit and get out of them. And so that's why they're still trying to find a way to get back into Syria. I mean, they're basically declared an illegal occupation of Syrian territory now. And they're just going to pour people and money into Afghanistan for no other reason than to say, well, we're not really losing.
I agree. Well, you have a nice day. That's all I have.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to John in Tennessee. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. The last day or two, Sibel Edmonds, Newsbud, they announced that there's going to be a new 9/11 Titans for Truth conference cranking up. It'll be the first annual one.
Okay.
Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't. I really do need to pay more attention to her.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a new thing, and they announced it, and everybody's excited about it. And one of the comments or one of the tweets today was, "Isn't it about time we have a new 9/11 Truth movement or something?" And that just, I agree, because all this hype about Trump and how many people came out to his rally and all this other stuff, or you saw what happened in Boston with the whatever there was, 12,000 counter protesters or whatever it was. It would be amazing if we could get that many Americans to still get pissed off about 9/11 to the point of they would oppose these wars. I mean, my biggest thing is, you know, I'm opposed to these alt-right rallies where they would go and invade another city when the city's already hostile to whatever you say is your values. And now the General Lee statue at Charlottesville just got covered up anyway, so, you know, they're going to take the monuments in these cities. But it's like this alt-right people, I mean, they're the ones provoking a race war now. So they're hypocrites.
No. The provocations are coming from the Black Lives Matter and Antifa people. They're certainly initiating the violence, but there's paid actors out there trying to sell you an image of what's going on. I mean, the guy, the white guy in Charlottesville who was carrying a Nazi flag has now been confirmed as a paid actor. He was hired to go in there carrying the Nazi flag so the media could take pictures of it and say, oh, look, all these white people, they're Nazis and supremacists. It was a setup. This guy who organized this group of people from conservatives, he led them into a trap. I mean, he's a leftist himself, and he led them into a trap. It's like when all those FBI undercover informants on Southern California colleges led all those students into the riot at Disneyland. They were basically set up to be made a horrible example of.
Well, no, but I mean, from my perspective, a guy like Spencer or Duke would have to be smart enough to pick that up and not send their people to a town that's not theirs. I mean, worry about your own backyard and protect the Confederate statues where you live. You guys don't all go travel to Charlottesville and have a 6-week build-up where Antifa can go bust their people in as well. I know Antifa is wrong. I know they initially...
They all arrived on the same buses. They're all bought and paid for.
Yes, they sure did.
Yeah, there was a public.
They sure did.
There's a public relations firm in Los Angeles that literally is advertising for people to show up and stage these riots. And they're hiring on both sides, the black side, the white side, the liberal side, the conservative side, and they bus them all in on the same buses, and they get on out, and they go into this area, and they do what they're going to do for the media cameras, and the media gets to go home with nice footage where they can make the political claims they want to make. And if necessary, they'll fake them, like where apparently CNN took people chanting, "You will not overcome us," and they processed it to make it sound like Jews will not overcome us. I mean, that's what the media is doing, okay? So you need to start from the point of fact that all these people you're seeing at these rallies, all these people committing the violence, they are not what they seem to be. They are hired to be there to create an illusion, to sell you that illusion and make you think the entire country is represented by that illusion.
Well, and like I said, my concern is if we have any more of these, you know, our truth war stops if they declare martial law or something, because they're making all the people look like fringe, you know.
That may be the agenda.
The government like fringe.
That may be the agenda, but, you know, as long as, you know, somebody's got a checkbook to pay for all this stuff, it's not going to stop. The police are being told to stand down. The police are literally being ordered to just allow this stuff to happen. It's a complete fraud.
Well, and Milo's threatening to go back to Berkeley again next month. I mean, again, why do these guys announce this stuff 6 weeks ahead of time so they can have a build-up? because they want it.
That's exactly
They want
right.
these riots.
That's exactly right. They want these things to build up. They want the tension to build up. They want to give the media ample notice to be there, to get it all on video. It is a setup. We have, again, going back to the staged riot at Disneyland, same thing. Was announced 2 months ahead of time so they could get as many people involved as possible. And it went on in. It turned into a disaster. It absolutely discredited the anti-Vietnam movement. And then in the 1980s, during the COINTELPRO hearings, we find out it was all set up by the FBI. And this looks like more of the same.
And, okay, and then when you're in one of your breaks, check your Twitter feed and check Netanyahu's tweets. Apparently, he just told Putin in no uncertain terms that he will not tolerate Iran moving into Syria. So.
Well, you know, Iran isn't moving into Syria. Iran is not in the habit of moving into other people's countries. They may have confused them with Israel, which is, you know, their borders are written in a dry erase marker. You know, Iran really...
Yeah, well, that's what Netanyahu tweeted out. Like, he put Putin in his place and said, I'll decide when Israel's under attack, Mr. Putin, not you. So, I mean...
Well,
they're cranking it up, Mike. They're cranking it up.
They definitely are. All right, well, John, we're going to let you go here. Get on back here to the news. But, yeah, Netanyahu is starting to sound as crazy as Kim Jong-un in terms of trying to get war going with somebody, anybody, and we don't care who. It's just there seems to be this contagious bloodlust circulating through the highest levels of leadership around the world, and it even seems to have infected Donald Trump, and that's very, very alarming. Now, Donald Trump also made a comment when he was talking tough about getting into Afghanistan and the surge there. He was talking about possibly needing to take action against Pakistan because Pakistan is now declared a haven for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. You see the pattern. We've seen it before. Oh, there's ISIS and Al-Qaeda there. It gives us a right to invade. And Pakistan is outright rejecting Trump's claim that they're supporting terror, saying that they're fighting against the terrorists as much as anybody else. Their borders are far more secure than, for example, Europe or the United States of America. But we know what's really going on here. The U.S. game plan is very simple. Oh, you have terrorists living in your territory. That gives us justification to invade and attack your country. Okay, now, last night in Phoenix, there were rumors circulating that Donald Trump was going to announce the pardon of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. And it didn't happen at the speech, and the White House issued a statement yesterday saying that there will be no pardon today. And that was the dead giveaway because, as it turns out, 1 day later, they are, in fact, processing the paperwork for a pardon for Joe Arpaio. And I think a lot of people are going to be very, very glad to see that happen. As long as he's got the pardon pen out, he may have to start whipping it around here for U.S. Senator Bob Menendez. Apparently, he is going to trial for corruption next month. Menendez tried to dismiss the charges based on a 2016 Supreme Court ruling, and the judge is going to review the motion, but as of right now, the trial is moving forward. So, there we are. Now, the Trump administration is going to invest nearly $500 million, or $500 million with a B, on new construction at Guantanamo. This is something he said he was going to do during the campaign. And it was one of his campaign promises I didn't agree with, so it's doubly frustrating that it's one of the ones he's keeping. But they are going to keep that facility open for newly captured jihadists, which is the politically correct word for some guy in the Middle East trying to save his home from being bombed. So, moving on here, let's see. Oh, this is interesting. I'm going to start this story, and then we're going to come back to it after the commercial break. Apparently, there's an attorney out in Southern California is filing a class action lawsuit against CNN on behalf of all the American people that have been defamed as white national radicals or separatists or supremacists or neo-Nazis. Yeah, there's a legitimate case there. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about this story over in San Diego. Southern California, there's an attorney, Joni Turner, and she has announced she is filing a civil, possibly class action lawsuit against CNN on behalf of all of the American people who have been defamed by CNN's describing us as white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and she's going further by saying CNN has actually been calling on the alt-left rioters to show up at events and cause havoc, which has resulted in physical harm and even death. That's an incitement to violence, which, by the way, there are laws against that. And CNN seems to feel it's above the laws. Now, obviously, CNN's got lots and lots of lawyers to hold off the lawsuit, but I think its mere existence is going to underscore that CNN and these other corporate media outlets are not, in fact, reporting the news. They are there trying to manufacture public opinion and steer it in the direction that their masters wish it to go. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Veronica in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I'm looking at the Constitution Society's Facebook page or internet page.
Yes.
And it says, attention all state and local law enforcement personnel. You took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and of your state against all enemies, foreign or domestic. And then there's also the law enforcement oath of honor. On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, my community, and the agency I serve. What happened to that? Where'd that go?
Well, it's all vanished. It's vanished in a culture of complete obedience to authority. And we're even seeing it with our military, where people like Lieutenant Aaron Watada, who took a stand that he was being given illegal, immoral orders, he's the lone exception. Most rank-and-file military, they know they're doing wrong, but they go along with it because they have been brainwashed into unquestioning obedience to authority. We're getting the same thing in the civilian life. That's what schools are teaching. That's what Common Core is all about. Don't think, don't analyze, don't ask questions, just believe what we tell you to believe and do what we tell you to do. And that is also what's being drilled into the police with all these Israeli security companies that are taking over their training. And that's why the police are behaving the way they are. If they get an order saying, crowd these two warring teams together and then back off, most are going to do it. Because they understand if they stand up and say, wait a minute, that may be a problem, they're going to be assigned parking duty or something for the rest of their career.
Oh, that's pretty tragic.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you for everything that you do, and looking forward to the rest of the show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open right now. Now, the other day, I was talking about one possible agenda which is behind all of this demonization of whites. Corporate media, they're all white separatists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, blah, 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 would be to try and convince American voters to be ashamed if they voted Republican in next year's midterms. And sure enough, Howard Dean wrote a column, or rather was interviewed by Al Hunt in a column in Bloomberg. And basically where they were talking about the fact that the Democratic Party doesn't have any policies they can run on anymore. And so, yeah, Howard Dean came on out and said, anybody who votes Republican next year is a racist. That's going to be their campaign. Because, after all, playing the race card worked so wonderfully well for Hillary last year. Why not do it again? But that's what they're going to do. They're going to try and sell the idea that anybody who votes for a Republican is a racist, which is doubly absurd when you remember that it was the Democrats who opposed abolition. The Democrats gave us the KKK. So, yeah, that's how desperate they are. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about all that. They're still pushing this nonsense about tear down the monuments, tear down this, tear down that. It wasn't all that long ago. Nobody really cared. because they hadn't figured out how they could use it for a political agenda. Back in the 1990s, remember the presidential campaign back then? All the major candidates, when they were campaigning in the South, they had buttons that featured that Confederate flag. You know, Southern pride, we're playing to that. Nancy Pelosi's father helped dedicate a statue to Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. This isn't something that's been around for a long time. It's been created to serve an immediate need, to split blacks from white, to demonize the whites, and try and play that race card one more time next year, even though obviously it failed miserably for Hillary Clinton last year. There were a lot of black people who voted for Donald Trump because they weren't voting based on the color of his or their skin, but basically on the record of the political parties. And I know we're all disappointed in Donald Trump, but I mean, American politics has gotten so dirty when they're out here literally trying to start race riots to win a few extra votes. People are getting seriously injured and killed in all this nonsense. But just because they're killed doesn't mean they're not going to vote next year. Just keep that in mind. We're going to go to the phones here. Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike, with Errol from the Netherlands.
Yes.
Everybody has seen the eclipse.
Well, we got rained out here on Oahu, so I couldn't see it directly. I've seen pictures of it. Some people have sent me some really well-done photos of the corona.
Okay, that's very nice, but I want to give to your audience, I want to give them an insight how big the sun is. Did you know, and obviously you know how big the sun is, but many people underestimated it. It's 1.3 million times. The Earth fits 1.3 million times in the sun.
Yes.
Did you know that?
Yes.
And that is funny because many people don't understand it. 1.3 million times the size of the Earth fits into the sun. So that's the only thing I want to give to you. And thank you for my call. And keep on the good work. And also to Lady Claire.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. One way that you can get a good sense of the scale of the sun is during a transit of Mercury or Venus. And unfortunately, I don't think there's another transit of Venus in the near future, but you can certainly see photos of the last two that happened. I even got a photo of it myself. Venus as a planet is very similar in size to the Earth, and you can see how tiny it looks against that solar disk. All right, back to the phones here. James in South Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I got two things, Michael. About a month ago, a guy supposedly on his deathbed confessed to putting explosives in Building 7. I never heard anything about it at all, but it's still on the internet. Do you know anything about it?
Yeah. We ran the story when it came on out that this individual had admitted being part of the demolition crew that put the charges into Building 7. I mean, obviously there had to be more than one. We know there were demolition charges. We could see those diagonal cut marks on the load-bearing members in the photos behind those firefighters. And the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. Now, I'm glad that Sibel Edmonds is going back into this issue. I don't think we need a new 9/11 Truth movement. There's a very strong one out there. And right now, of course, the focus is on Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and Richard Gage, and they continue to do yeoman's work getting the truth out there. At this point, I think most Americans understand they have not been told the truth about 9/11, just like they were not told the truth about Saddam's nuclear weapons, and so forth and so on and so forth and so on. And I think probably the reason we're not seeing a lot of anger and rage is because people have just come to accept that the government does these sorts of things.
Okay, well, there's another one. I heard last week that someone had taken a statistical inquiry into the age of the mothers of the Sandy Hook children. And if I remember right, there were 20 children killed, supposedly, and the age of the mothers at the child's birth was age 36. And the guy said that this was such an unusual situation that it would be, it is more unusual than if all the mothers were left-handed or if all the mothers were green-eyed. And I mean, I've seen this a couple of times, and it seems like to me this would be something that someone could make something out of. I mean, if what he says is true, the people were probably actors.
Well, yeah, and whoever's writing the script wasn't really paying attention to it, because it is statistically improbable, but a statistic anomaly by itself is not going to be a compelling proof, because people are aware that numbers can be manipulated. You've got lies, darned lies, and statistics. But again, I think there's much more compelling proof that Sandy Hook was another hoax by the fact that the school itself was not actually in use at the time. It had been shut down years before. Analysis of its internet traffic confirmed all the computers were shut off and they were never turned on. Wolfgang Halbig, who's a professional school safety consultant, was pointing out on all these photos about how there's missing rails, safety rails, mold in all in the rooms, stuff that normally would not be allowed to exist in a functioning operating school. And so it does look like it was an abandoned school used as a set, which happens. When I was working on Lost, we used a defunct school as a set. It's since been revitalized and reopened. But yeah, there's lots of empty schools out there that you can use for these things.
Well, it just looks like, I mean, with everything that's happening, that we could go on the attack on some of these things okay, instead of letting all them attack the monuments and all like that. Just an idea.
Well, you know, it's an idea, and what we need to do, though, is we basically need to focus our defense, if you will, on where we're being attacked, and basically to expose that this is just another government hoax, like Sandy Hook, like the Boston Marathon bombing, like 9/11. This is just another play. I mean, having actually been at that Disneyland riot, I mean, this feels like exactly the same thing. A bunch of, and the FBI's now admitted they had undercover informants in that crowd in Charlottesville. I mean, how much more obvious does it get? And I think it's far more important for us to get the message out to our friends and family that this is a staged production to allow the media to denounce us all as white supremacists and separatists and try and make us all look like we're haters and Nazis in an attempt to recapture the Congress for the Democrats next year, which is, you know, Howard Dean has now confirmed that's the agenda.
Well, that's not much of a platform.
No, it isn't. But when have the Democrats really had a platform that people could really get behind? I mean, they've been playing identity politics and pitting people against each other, the woman card, the abortion card, the LGBTQ card, and everybody's just sick and tired of hearing about all the whiners. The Democrats have turned themselves into the party of the whiners, and people are just fed up with it.
Okay, Michael, thank you. All
right, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Scott in California. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I've heard about 4 different things mentioned in the last 10 minutes. So, yeah, we are seeing a long-term destabilization. Sandy Hook, the Aurora shooting, the thing in Orlando, it's all just staged events. But what's on my mind right now, I find this Confederate monument taken down stuff, it's just really disheartening, sad. That's what I come away with. But I'm wondering if we are going to see Muhammad Ali become a non-person, and here's why. When he came back from the Rumble in the Jungle, where he fought George Foreman in the mid-'70s, he'd been there for 3 or 4 months preparing for the fight. When he came back, a reporter at the airport said, well, what'd you think of Africa? And Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, said this, thank God for slavery.
Well, you know, he was absolutely right. I mean, the reality is that the black population of America today if you compare them with the black population in the original African regions where the slaves were captured by their fellow African, I would like to point that out, they're obviously healthier, much more well-off financially, and yet they're going to sit there and whine and cry that they're a victim class. Now, you want to see a victim class? Go back and look at the descendants of the ones who were not captured as slaves. That's a victim class.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing. I mean, I can't imagine anybody, wanting to be a slave, and it's brutal and cruel. But our the founders, that when they were doing the Constitution, they had to do something called the Great Compromise. I mean, a lot of those founders didn't. They hated slavery, and who wouldn't? But anyway, here we are now, and what I'm really seeing is, I lived in China for a while, and what I'm seeing is what they did with that Cultural Revolution over there in the mid-'60s to mid-'70s. That's what I'm seeing as regards to Confederate monuments. They're just, it said, social destabilization. They hope to control the outcome. It's just disgusting. Okay, Michael, I'll get back to your show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And you're absolutely right. We've been seeing this idea of just erasing all of history. Because, I mean, they're not just targeting the Confederate monuments anymore. They have been going after Abraham Lincoln. They knocked down a peace monument. They thought it had something to do with the Confederacy. It didn't. This is just about burning down the past to break us all loose from our history, to make us easy to control. And that's what it's really all about. Okay, back to the phones here. David in San Francisco, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Michael. It's funny you mentioned that, trying to hide the past. Out here in San Francisco, you might see a bunch of advertisements saying that this is the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love. But the people who were really there and the people who really set it up to begin with,
yeah,
the original promoters and whatnot, have had their permit denied twice, and these big corporate boys are running the show, and so what's going to happen in 50 years if the corporate boys do it on our 50th anniversary? Idiocracy or whatever. That's also created quite a stir up here that Summer of Love has been denied in the parks in San Francisco twice. A free concert with all of the famous bands and all this sort of thing. That's been denied twice. Yet the Klan Nazis get a permit without any problem. So talk about rewriting history. It's pretty profound.
Well,
I was going to... Go ahead.
I was going to say, well, it's not just rewriting history. It's all about the money, because I'm sure from the point of view of San Francisco's city government, any kind of a concert in the park is going to leave behind trash that has to be dealt with. They're going to have to secure it. It's going to cost them a lot of money for an event that isn't itself generating any revenue. And so, obviously, the politicians are going to go with any corporate-backed endeavor that promises to actually generate a revenue stream and turn it all into a profit center, both for themselves and for the city government. And I think that was probably...
the park, though, was actually... They have a charter for the park, and the park was... the original designers of the park didn't even want roads in it. They wanted actual green area because everything was getting so foul, that people actually needed a place to escape and get some clean air, and back to nature for a few minutes.
Same thinking that led to a Central Park in Manhattan.
Right, yeah, well, it's Olmsted. Yeah, the same guy designed both of them.
Yes.
Or he was offered the job, if I remember right. But, what I was going to lead up to, the market forces, to me, seems to be out of place with some of this. If you look, down there in Charlottesville, they did have a permit, those Nazi Klan, whatever they were, and that was granted a week earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the night before, they had that big torchlight rally, and those guys were like marching in formation virtually, and then yelling Nazi signs as they were pounding on the door of Hebrew synagogue, and so the idea that that permit was yanked that night, bam, court order, yanked that permit. So when everybody showed up Saturday morning, your permit's denied. And so when you see, and there's video, you can see this on YouTube, for example. I've seen at least 2 and probably 3 different camera angles of the same deal, where the bullhorn, the police chief saying this permit's canceled, go home, everybody, and then you see the line of cops, this wall of cops, and that's basically where the guys were holding up that big flat board sign, and then it gets kicked in kind of weird angle. That's the police chief speaks just before that, maybe a minute and a half before that, and there's like some hemming and hawing and tussling, and then they push against the cops, and then that sign comes out. So if you look for that, talk about fake news. For 3 weeks, two and a half weeks, I guess it is, since that happened, people have basically taken the position that the Nazi Klan had a legitimate permit that morning. But no, that permit was yanked. So,
well, my question is going to be, and again, knowing how much fakery is going on here, we know that at least one of the people carrying a Nazi flag was paid to be there and paid to carry that flag. I'm wondering how many more were there to go up to that Hebrew school and cause a ruckus to try and get the permit yanked. And
have you seen the aerial shot of that march?
I've seen.
I mean, there's got to be like 1,500 people. It's a long march, and they're like
but you only need 5 or 6 in the front, holding up flags and banners that the people behind them can't even see, and you've sold the idea. They used to do this kind of stuff. If you go back and read the history of Watergate and Segretti. Yeah, Segretti, the dirty tricks that he would do.
I think Roger Stone get his start with Segretti?
I think so. Anyway, gotta let you go. Gotta take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about all of the civil discord, domestic tension over the issue of Confederate monuments and even non-Confederate monuments being torn down and being defaced. Now, nobody's gone after the Georgia Guidestones yet, I notice, but it is getting out of hand here. And there's big money involved. We already know about that public relations firm that's out there in Southern California. They're hiring people. They're putting ads in Craigslist to hire people to show up and cause a ruckus. And, of course, the Southern Poverty Law Center, they're getting millions and millions of dollars for the specific task of silencing conservatives online. So this is definitely a full court push for the liberals to regain control of the society. Politically, media, online. Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton, even though he has been co-opted and he's going along with the war agenda and everything else, it still rattled the liberal establishment who thought they had an absolute guaranteed lock on this country, or the narcocracy, or the deep state, or whatever you want to call it. So there's a lot of money being put out there. Now, we have seen over the last several years a concerted attack on the Bill of Rights. And we know the government has completely abandoned even the pretext of compliance with the Fourth Amendment right to privacy. We know that they're constantly ignoring the Ninth and Tenth Amendments regarding creation of new power and authority for themselves. We know they ignore that part of the Fifth Amendment that says they can't take our property without just compensation, and yet they're using all of our computers against us. And certainly there's been an open war against the Second Amendment. And now over at MSNBC, Katie Tour did a segment on challenging the First Amendment and saying that what was happening in Charlottesville and all these other places shows that there have to be limits to free speech. There are pitfalls. That certain groups, it's okay to silence and censor them. So that's the beginning of the slippery slope. Now, I'm sure that corporate media isn't going to give up unrestricted right to freedom of speech. They just want other people to be silenced, especially those who point it out when the corporate media is making mistakes or lying. Yahoo News is actually enforcing the Antifa terrorist organization. Joining CNN, the corporate media are cheering these people along while they're beating up conservatives. We are still waiting to hear anything from the White House regarding that petition on the White House petition website to declare Antifa a terrorist organization. They got more than 200,000 signatures on that. Only 100,000 are required to force a response. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We got callers waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a couple of phone calls, starting with Dave in it's either Louisiana or Los Angeles. Dave, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
You know, Trump must be a really terrible father. Or the whole thing about him being a white nationalist is a Broadway act. Because he has 3 grown kids that are married to Jews.
Dave. First of all, your call is breaking up here. And second, I'm already not liking the direction you're trying to take this discussion. So we're going to let you go here and switch over to Ernest in Reno. Aloha, Ernest. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I just want to say that I've been listening to you for a bit, and you talk about how what we have to do now in the next 10 years, our boomer generation is going to lose a lot of our relevance. And the new coming generation actually has been raised on relativism. And unfortunately, I just don't see how that's going to be able to turn it around. So these people, they're going to follow the left. All their values are all based on these kind of fighting what they see as anything absolute, anything of authority. They call fascist. They don't reason the same as we do because their whole value system is totally different. It's based on relativism.
Well, they haven't been taught to reason. I mean, that was a big part of Common Core, was not to teach people how to think or analyze or solve problems, but merely to accept what they're told as the, you'll pardon the expression, gospel truth, and to act on it as if it's real.
Right. But you know, Mike, the thing is that I saw this coming from the early 80s, raising my child and watching what they're bringing home from the public schools. I knew that these people coming up, the early millennials or whatever I think they're called, anybody that's like under 40 years old absolutely has a relativism-based value system that appeals to anything that's left, that's anything against authority. That's their core belief, like you had talked about earlier. And that anything that you try to reason with them the way we reason, what's right or wrong, that just upsets their core belief. They won't even listen.
You're right.
Right. It's just not something that they don't do. And they're going to follow that globalist race card, the gender card, all these cards that they pull that are against absolute. They're going to follow that instinctively. And so I really don't. And another point, too, is when you speak about how we should just let our country just fall apart in the same way that the Soviet Union did. The difference being is that this country is slated to fall apart, and the blue helmets, which includes half the world's armies, are just waiting for that to happen. They're not going to let us. They're not going to sit by and just let us say, let's start. No, it's not going to happen, Mike.
Well, that all depends on how quickly we crack those access codes to the nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
not exactly a positive thing.
We have working nukes.
But,
leave us alone. We're going to start a new country. We don't need your help. Go away. When we have something to sell you, we'll give you a call.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I hate to be, pessimistic, but I just don't see anything, And one more thing, Mike, is that, honestly, I believe that the reason why we're not seeing all these big shots getting prosecuted on any side, either side of the establishment, I think you're going to see, or we're going to find out, if not sooner rather than later, that this whole thing about the pizza thing, the Pizzagate, the pedophilia, that has a larger bearing. Throughout history, the big shots have, covered themselves, and that's a common denominator.
Well, I first of all, I don't like using the word Pizzagate because that was a setup to try and embarrass the independent media, and unfortunately, too many people fell for it. But that being said, obviously, pedophilia is a major, major problem. We had a story on the website here about the U.S. gymnastics team, and again, I have no understanding and certainly no sympathy for this kind of thing, but apparently it does go along. We all remember the scandal that involved the White House and Boys Town, the Franklin scandal. That was a big, nasty one, and they worked very hard to keep that covered up. So, yeah, apparently if you are of the psychology that drives you to seek positions of power and authority, then this is the sort of thing that you get your jollies on. And maybe that's it. These are people who are just used to getting whatever they want with hardly any effort, and the only thrill they can get, the only adrenaline rush they can get is doing something that is so outside the social norm and getting away with it. It is a very part of that power corrupting mechanism here. But I disagree with you.
Mike, okay.
I was going to say, first of all, I think when the U.S. government collapses, they're not going to be coming across the border because it didn't happen when the Soviet Union collapsed. I mean, after all the animosity and enmity between the Soviet Union and the United States, you didn't see the U.S. seize that opportunity to invade the former Soviet Union for a very simple reason. The new Russian republics still had those nuclear weapons, and the U.S. government does not interfere with countries that can actually defend themselves. Anyway, Ernest, we're going to let you go here. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And we're going to go back to the phones to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, have you talked about the American diplomats and the Canadian diplomat that was microwaved down in Cuba? Do you know much about that story?
Well, when I heard the story, they said it was sound waves, not microwaves. And frankly, it strikes me as a little bit out there. And they're trying to basically reverse this whole policy of normalization with Cuba, which, by the way, I think is an absolute mistake, because if we are going to go into a new war against Russia, the very last thing we should be doing is driving Cuba back into the Russian sphere of influence, because that's what led to all kinds of problems during the original Cold War, including the Cuban Missile Crisis. I thought Obama was doing the smart thing to start to normalize relations. I was certainly looking forward to some Cuban rum and Cuban cigars. But all of a sudden we're back to this, we're going to sneer at Cuba, and it's basically creating an ideal situation to go back to a repeat of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, this morning it was reported that those diplomats, they were suffering from brain damage as well as, spinal cord injuries.
Okay.
Yeah, so... Again, why would Cuba do that?
That is the question right there. Why would Cuba do that to diplomatic personnel? And the answer is they wouldn't. Okay,
so who do you think was behind it then?
I don't know that it's actually happened. I'm telling you, my little bovine excrement meter is twitching on this one.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Well, I know one thing. Cuba is very close to Venezuela, most of the Latin American countries.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. In fact, because of their standing up to the U.S. government for so many years, Cuba is held in high regard. But again, the U.S. may be getting ready to go back into Cuba. Just take it on over again, like they tried to do at the Bay of Pigs.
Right. Now, answer this question. Do you think maybe Russia has something to do with it?
No.
No? Okay. All right. Well, I'll let you go on that note. You take care.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Again, what's the motive? Why would Putin do something like that? It's just nonsense. Okay. Now then. That being said, there is a way to plant a microphone in secure diplomatic facilities, and believe it or not, it was invented by the same guy who invented the musical instrument, the theremin. And basically what it involves is you have a passive reflector for microwave energy. It's hidden inside a piece of art or something, and it's connected to a diaphragm where audio waves in the room will cause this passive reflector to flex. And you beam an unmodulated microwave beam into the building, and then you have a receiver set up to catch the reflection coming off the passive repeater. It's just a piece of foil. And you can hear what's going on in the room. And it's impossible to find because the bug itself is not, in fact, putting out any radio energy. It's merely reflecting radio energy that's coming in from outside. Now, somebody could possibly be doing that, but the amount of microwave energy that such a device uses is very, very low because it doesn't need to be high, and more to the point, if you've got a really powerful microwave beam coming into the building, it will be detected, and people will start wondering what it's really all about. Now, getting on back to Antifa. Two professors, one from Purdue University and the other from Stanford, are assembling a campus anti-fascist network to serve as a big tent for anyone committed to fighting fascism. And despite the reputation these Antifa groups have cultivated, with all the violence to shut down opposing speakers, the professors insist that they only support self-defense by those who are being threatened by fascists. We see fascists everywhere. There are fascists in my closet. There are fascists underneath my bed. There are fascists hiding in the dryer. I think my dog is a fascist. I mean, it really is getting ridiculous out there. And what is ironic, of course, is they're out there screaming their opposition to fascism while acting like fascists. Now, there's a big fight brewing up regarding Georgia's Stone Mountain. It's become yet another ideological battlefield. It's being considered as the Mount Rushmore of the Confederacy, and it is huge. It's carved into the side of this giant block of stone, and you can see it on Google Earth, get a sense of where it is and what its scale is. And there's a big fight there. We're going to go in and we're just going to scrape that off. Going to erase all of your history, so you have no idea who you are, where you came from. Just listen to us, and we'll tell you all you need to know. And this is how ridiculous it's getting. Over at ESPN, they were covering the University of Virginia football game, and they have this Asian American sportscaster who was kicked off the show because his name is Robert Lee. Now, given that he's Asian, Lee is a very common name. Remember Bruce Lee? It really is getting ridiculous. People are being demonized for things they have no control over. Like cognitive privilege. It's not like we bribed somebody to make us more intelligent. It's just the way we were born. You don't want to be demonized over your skin color? Fine. Don't demonize us over our high IQs. Now, over on CNN tonight, Don Lemon is out there screaming, President Trump is trying to incite a civil war in the U.S., saying that Trump is giving oxygen to racists. No. Donald Trump said what was obvious to everybody. Both sides engaged in violence. Both sides were wrong. And they're out there screaming because the agenda is to only blame the whites for what's going on. And people aren't going along with it. The polls are showing the majority of Americans agreed with Donald Trump. Both sides were committing violence. Both sides were acting badly. As to who is trying to ignite a civil war, it is not Donald Trump. It is the people paying these hired actors to stage these violent protests, backed up by the corporate media that are trying to create a climate of civil unrest. Now, whether that is to help the Democrats regain Congress next year or lead to a situation of a declaration of a national emergency, but it's clearly being a manufactured phenomenon. And that's the message we need to get out to everybody. This is fake. This is staged. So, here's an interesting story. This is over on Breitbart. Black Lives Matter activist unveils list of demands to white people. Give up the home you own. And this organizer down in Louisville basically saying things need to change. And what she's saying is if white people don't have any descendants, then you should leave your property to a black or brown family, preferably one that lives in generational poverty. And then goes on to another huge bunch of demands. Give us stuff, or we'll riot. We've seen that before. Again, Zimbabwe. And I guess there's one group of deprived individuals, cultural victims, if you want, didn't want to wait for somebody to die because the New York Police Department just released surveillance video of this flash mob stealing thousands of dollars worth of goods from a New York City sneaker stores. And apparently they hit 3 or 4 stores and they got them all on video. Now, getting on over to William Shatner. And this article says he's risking his career. It's over at teaparty.org. No, he isn't. He's pretty much retired at this point here. But in his retirement, he has gotten himself a really nice ranch, and he likes horses. He loves horses. And as a matter of fact, there's even an episode of American Pickers, where they are hired by Shatner to get some themed decorator items for his little home and stables. So anyway, there's a statue near where Shatner is of John B. Castleman. And during the Civil War, Castleman formed a cavalry unit that went on guerrilla operations against Union supply boats. He was arrested, but his execution was stayed by President Lincoln. After the war, Castleman was pardoned, and he became a cavalry leader for the Union Army during the Spanish-American War, participated in the invasion of Puerto Rico, and eventually was named its military governor. And for his heroism, he was promoted to a brigadier general. Now, Shatner's an avid horseman, and it was for these reasons he donated money years ago to the construction of a Louisville, Kentucky monument to General Castleman. Not as a Confederate, not as a Union, but as an excellent horseman and cavalry leader. And Bill makes a valid point that nobody seems to be talking about. Many people who served in the Confederacy went on to serve the Union after the war was over. And we need to remember that. So, okay. Now, as you know, we got this story just coming in at the end of the show yesterday. The jury in the current Bundy Ranch trial refused to convict. Not a single guilty verdict was proffered. It was a shock to the prosecutors and the judge, and that judge had done everything possible to throw this trial to the prosecutors, would not let Bundy's lawyers make any arguments on constitutional grounds, would not allow them to basically talk about citizens' right to protect their property from inappropriate government seizure, which is what this is all about. The BLM went on in and was literally stealing Bundy's cattle, putting it on trailers and taking it away, and Bundy defended his property. And so the jury saw through it all. They saw through all the machinations, and that's a reminder that the highest authority in that courtroom is that jury. Not the judge, not the lawyers. The jury is the supreme authority in a court of law. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Let's start taking some phone calls. John Michael, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, snack bar, my friend. Just want to talk about Afghanistan. That picture you were talking about back in the 70s. Wasn't that before the United States and the CIA got involved? Wasn't that, like, before that? Like, we wrecked nations on their accord. I mean, it's ridiculous. We've set up the Taliban and all that nonsense. But, yeah, that sucks. But my actual question is, when this country was founded, when the Constitution was being written, why didn't the founding fathers specifically write a law into place that, like, would not allow central banking?
Well, originally, they wrote the Constitution in a way to replicate the economy that they'd evolved as colonies, which was only the government had the authority to coin money. And that's because the physical coin, the metal in the coin, was the money. And the Constitution does not, in fact, authorize the government to delegate the money creation authority to anybody, let alone a private bank. And so the fact of the matter is the Federal Reserve is unconstitutional. But the Federal Reserve was created at the same time the government was demonstrably already breaking away from constitutional restrictions. Again, there are serious doubts that the 16th Amendment, which authorized the personal income tax, was ever actually properly ratified. And so, again, even back then, 100 years ago, you had the Congress and the President just off and doing what they wanted to do and not following the Constitution. And if there isn't a mechanism by which the people can restrain the government and keep them in compliance with the Constitution, then inevitably it's going to break away. The government will break away from controls. And Thomas Jefferson warned about that. He predicted that this wonderful experiment in government that he had invented was only going to last about 100 years, and then it would have to be torn down by a new revolution. And that was why they gave us the Second Amendment. And
man,
yeah.
And Andrew Jackson, who, I mean, he's the mega racist, like Stalin, not Stalin, like Hitler, the mega racist. They want to take his statue off and remove him off the $20 bill. Didn't he fight against central banking and they tried to kill him or something like that?
Yeah, he shut down the Second Bank of the United States of America. He campaigned for his second term in office on that. And, he succeeded in ending the charter to allow the Second Bank of the United States to create its own money. And the Second Bank of the United States tried to operate as a regular depositor bank and failed after just 2 years, which is a reminder that private central banks are legalized counterfeiting operations and they don't actually know anything about being a bank.
Hell yeah. Well, that's your privilege, Michael, and that's microaggression racism. I'm talking about Andrew Jackson in a good way, so shame on you.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll accept the shame. Okay, well, John, we're
thanks, Mike.
We're going to let you go and switch over to Dan in Washington. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking the call. Curious about the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Do you think we were actually just helping China dominate the region by, like, dividing Korea and then destroying Vietnam? Because, we were kind of on China's side there in World War II. And then, when Nixon kind of opened China up, like, it just seems like we've been helping China really dominate the region.
No,
and we're fighting communism. But
look how the U.S. changes allegiances or alliances from moment to moment. I mean, originally in Afghanistan, the Taliban were our friends. Now they're our enemies. Certainly during World War II, the U.S. And Russia and China were all on the same side against the Axis powers. But as soon as World War II was over, the U.S. immediately started demonizing the Soviet Union because they were afraid of communism coming to the United States. Ditto China as well, which was still communist at that time. And so they had to demonize China and demonize Russia. And in point of fact, no, they were not helping China dominate the region. They were basically going into any country that looked like it might decide to go with a communist economy as opposed to fascism, and they would basically knock it down.
Okay, I was just curious about that because it seems like say, Korea united, they'd be kind of a powerful force.
Well, South Korea already is. We got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right back to the phones. George in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for taking my call. About almost 25 years ago, I sat on a jury because some abuse victim, turned in a couple because she asked the preschool class, has your parents touched your private parts? And this is to a 3-year-old girl. And the parents got arrested. And, before I sat on the jury panel, the prosecutor was out there just demonizing this couple, how awful they are as parents and how abusive they were. But the thing, when I was selected a jury, you know what I said? I said, I'm going to ignore what the media says, and I'm going to listen to what happened. And believe me, me and the other 11 jurors who sat in that box and listened for evidence for a few days, the judge would not allow the couple to bring in witnesses or their own experts, anything in their defense, but the prosecution got a free rein on this. And as a jury, we saw through this, and guess what? We acquitted them. And, we said to the accused couple when we left when we gave the verdict, we said, we are sorry this happened to you because there was no reason for this to happen. And as a juror, when you don't get to see the other evidence and you only get to see the states, something's wrong. And when evidence came out that would exonerate them, it was struck down. And here's the thing is, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, that's going to tarnish them for their lives here. I mean, the first thing would occur to me, first of all, it looked like the entire prosecution case was based on hearsay evidence. The teacher says that the student says that mommy and daddy touched the private parts. The next question should have been, are we talking about them giving you a bath? As opposed to something else. That never seemed to have even entered into the discussion. But you need to understand these child protection agencies, the size of their budget is directly related to how many kids they take away from the homes. And we saw a lot of this being abused. Again, back in the 1990s, during the heyday of militant feminism, where, again, just as white people are being demonized in the corporate media today, back then it was men and fathers, and all fathers are really abusers. And I remember one time that I was talking to this lady who worked for Child Protective Services, and she said with an absolute straight face, all fathers will molest their children. I'm the one who decides when something gets done about it. I mean, that was the attitude. And it led to a lot of abuses, families being destroyed, lives being ruined. And ultimately it backflashed because some people started getting lawyers. And down in San Diego, they literally had to shut down their entire child protective department and fire everybody because the city was just losing money hand over fist in all these lawsuits over constitutional violations.
Well, the thing is, when this was brought up as exculpatory evidence, that was struck. Also, too, the mental state of the person who said this, who reported him, who was an abuse victim herself, that really was many sandwiches short of a picnic. Her credibility wasn't never questioned. And like I say, all this was thrown out. They wanted a conviction at all costs.
Yes.
But one of the nice things that happened is that the parents sued the daycare center and got a nice whopping settlement because defamation. They did not, they just ran with the ball. They did not question the credibility or anything. So, the thing, this is important why, I tell people it's important for you to do jury duty because you don't know who you're going to. I say you'd rather have an informed person in that jury than some person who wants to go back to watching her Oprah show. it's important that when we're called for jury duty, that we go serve.
Yes. Absolutely.
And be informed.
Absolutely. And always remember, it is the jury that is the highest authority in that courtroom, above the lawyers, above the judge. And that's why you're there, because the recognition that judges can be corrupt, lawyers can be ambitious, and they're willing to sacrifice the innocent to score points for their careers. And that is exactly why the jury system exists and why the jury is the highest authority in that courtroom. That courtroom. Their word is final. Their word is it. That's it.
Well, you know, the thing is, I could not, when I was in that deliberation room, I could not, with a clear conscience, say they're guilty.
Yeah.
So that's why it was my conscience that, you know, someone said, this is wrong.
Yes.
And, you know, in Florida, it has a kangaroo court system. And, you know, I'm just going, you know, and I just tell people, if you get someone to go on a jury, go.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and the phone lines are now clear for the moment. We're getting a breaking story. Do you remember about 8 months ago, the Russian ambassador to Turkey was shot dead in broad daylight? And now another Russian ambassador has died, this one the ambassador to Sudan. And there are already two different versions of the story. One saying that he appears to have been the victim of a heart attack, and the other one saying that he appears to have drowned in his own pool. But it does seem like there's a lot of wet work going on, and we know that the U.S. has been making noises about getting into Sudan recently. Now then, this is a very troubling story on a couple of different fronts here. And let's see. IndyStar.com. This bothers me a little bit for two different conflicting reasons. The state of Indiana has released another batch of Vice President Mike Pence's emails from his personal America Online account during his time as governor. And they show the Catholic Archbishop in Indianapolis asked him to intercede in the parole of Paula Cooper, once the youngest death row inmate in the United States, which sounds like a good thing. I'm troubled by this one. On one hand, we have yet another politician using private email for official government business. And on the other hand, I'm troubled by the fact that America Online was just willing to release all this to the state of Indiana. And I'm wondering, did they actually have a warrant? And if they have a warrant, are they investigating an actual crime? It almost feels like everyone's playing a little too fast and loose with the rules out there. And that's troubling. Now, we are getting word that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is getting closer and closer to an actual indictment. It has now come on out that Imran Awan was storing classified data outside official government computer networks. The same thing Hillary Clinton was doing. This is a Title 18 violation. Did Debbie Wasserman Schultz know about it? Did she encourage it? Did she do the due diligence to prevent this leakage of classified information? I hope she doesn't get depressed real soon. Now, up at, well, actually, she's on her way to Vienna. Nikki Haley is out there demanding the IAEA launch new inspections of Iran military sites. They're trying to find a way to provoke Iran to walking away from the P5+1 deal so that they can say, ooh, look, Iran is the bad guy, and we are going to bomb them. But the reality is that the IAEA has been inspecting all the nuclear sites that were agreed to on the P5+1, and they gave Iran yet another clean bill of health only a couple of months ago. Now, Nikki Haley is out there saying that the P5+1 deal gives the IAEA authority to look at any military base anywhere in Iran, including ones that are involved with Iran's missile defense system, but not necessarily nuclear. And basically the IAEA is saying, no, there is a specific list of places we can look. It's not an open-ended access. And they did the same thing to Saddam Hussein when they were trying to get ready to go in there. Oh, he's got weapons of mass destruction. We need to look here. We need to look there. And Saddam kept saying, yes, you can look here. You can look there. Saddam even let them look in his official residence and carry out an inspection, like he's going to go to bed at night with a thermonuclear bomb underneath his bed. They didn't find anything, and they still invaded and killed him. And Nikki Haley is just playing a classic game, going to make more and more and more extreme demands until Iran says, no, that's unreasonable. And then Nikki Haley would say, aha, Iran is now violating the agreement. It's actually the U.S. is in violation. Iran has kept everything they committed to in the P5+1. The U.S. government has not. They did not end all the sanctions. They did not unfreeze all the assets. In fact, they've been adding more and more sanctions on top of it, which Iran rightly sees as a violation of the spirit of the P5+1. And so that's where we are right now. All right, let's take a phone call from Alex in Florida. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I heard a gentleman, I forget his name. I think his first name was Dix, whatever that is.
Okay.
But anyway, he was claiming that Donald Trump could release the 650,000 emails on Winger's laptop if he wanted to. That he has all that information, but it would collapse the government. But he's saying that would be an option if Trump finds that he's losing complete control. Do you believe that he has access to those emails?
I don't know, obviously, but I do know this sounds like more confirmation that my theory about what's really behind Hillary's private email server is bang spot on. Because if that is made public, it will bring the entire government down, because everybody was dirty with this. Everybody was dirty with all of this stuff here. But as far as a kill shot coming from Trump, I don't think he wants to be down in the history books as the president who was the last president of the United States of America. And I would like to see those emails come on out. But at this point, we've now had 2 different attorney generals, 2 different heads of the FBI, and none of them will do a darn thing about Hillary's email server. In fact, we're hearing rumors that they're going to just get out of it with a plea deal where she will admit to a very minor transgression, a misdemeanor, which means she'll still be legally allowed to run for high office. And in exchange, they will close all the investigations into the email server and all the investigations into the Clinton Foundation. They want that to go away.
Yeah,
There's a big, stinking mess inside there, and I got a pretty good idea what it is.
Do you think that Julian Assange possibly has those emails that he could release?
I think if he had them, he already would have. We know the FBI has them, but again, we have a director of the FBI who seems intent on maintaining this cover-up.
Wow. I don't know. I think if you have that information, it's your duty as the highest office of the land, the president, to go ahead and release those. I mean, wouldn't you think if we look back in history and he was the one that released them, he could, he has to release those.
I'd like to see them. I'd like to see them released. I'm convinced it's only a matter of time before this government comes crashing down. And frankly, at this point, the sooner it happens, the better for a lot of people concerned, because we're in the phase of the nation where it's just killing everybody. It's making war in every direction, trying to find something that's going to work and get them out of this mess that they're in. So again, what lies behind the Hillary email server, I think, is the selling out of U.S. secrets to foreign interests. The laundering of the payments through the foundation, along with the Clinton and Bush and CIA ties to the CIA's opium running, the narcocracy, and they're bringing it in by the tons from Afghanistan right now.
Yeah, that was another correlation that I kind of made as far as Trump's announcement about adding another 4,000 troops to Afghanistan. I wonder if that has anything to do with this guy that was with Wasserman Schultz that was trying to go over to Afghanistan.
He was heading to Pakistan.
No, Pakistan. I guess no. I guess that I'm incorrect. So. Yeah. I don't know. I agree with you that if we the people realize that, or we already know that if our government's above the law, they're really not representatives of us, and it would be a collapse, I would think. I mean, what are people going to do next election? Vote for someone that basically doesn't have teeth. Apparently, nobody has the teeth to bring the country to show the evidence that would prove their crime.
Well, they're all complicit. When we talk about the deep state and the narcocracy, and everybody says, well, where is it? It's just open your eyes. It's right in front of you. It is all these politicians. It is all the corporate media. It is all these banks that launder the money. It is a huge, huge enterprise, and everybody is dirty with it. And everybody wants to protect it. They want all the money to keep pouring into their pockets. And they're perfectly okay with it. We are a nation, unfortunately, being run by drug lords. And we're hardly the first.
Yeah.
We're hardly the first. Colombia went through that. Look at Sicily and their problems with organized crime corrupting their government. Look what we went through during Prohibition and how corrupt it became.
Yeah, and I would think that, well, I'm almost certain of it, that all of our government buildings have symbology in them that could offend people. I mean, I'm sure that the Senate has symbology, the way it's built and stuff like that. I'm sure everything does.
I'm offended by those fascist symbols right there on either side of the podium in the House of Representatives.
What are those?
Well, if you look at a photo, it's basically a representation of a bundle of sticks tied together with an axe blade coming out of it. And these are painted gold, but it's a Roman symbol for fascism. And a lot of people look at that and they don't realize they're basically broadcasting that, yes, Western capitalism is a fascistic system.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to bring something down, let's bring that down first. I mean, let's tear that all apart. Look at the symbology on the dollar bill. I mean, that's the worst that there could be, I would think. The all-seeing eye and all the symbology of that.
Well, that's a slippery slope because people will see things, the same symbols, and interpret them different ways. In fact, there's a wonderful opening sequence on Angels and Demons that illustrates that exactly. What is one person's symbol of evil is another person's symbol of goodness, and we shouldn't be ripping things down based on one person being offended. We'll be right back. Thank you for the phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm going to step back into this issue about the Confederate memorials and demonizing the Confederacy. And as you know, there are actually laws with very stiff sentences or fines for disturbing war memorials of U.S. veterans. You can go to jail for a very, very long time. And what most of these whiners, these Black Lives Matter, Antifa people don't seem to understand is members of the Confederacy are, by U.S. law, considered American military veterans. This was set into law many times. The Congressional Act of 1900, the Congressional Act of 1906 by the 17th Congress in 1929, and U.S. Public Law 85-425, Section 410 of May 1958. Those people on those Confederate monuments are U.S. military veterans, and they are protected by law against having their monuments defaced. A little bit of trivia is you'd be amazed how many very prominent Americans had Confederates in their family tree. Remember Army Lieutenant General George Patton, World War II? His grandfather was Colonel George Patton of the Confederate States of America. President Theodore Roosevelt's uncle was Confederate States of America Chief Foreign Agent Captain James D. Bullock. President Woodrow Wilson's father, Reverend J.R. Wilson, was a chaplain for the Confederacy. So it's not like it's an us and them. These are all Americans. And they had a disagreement with the way the federal government was exceeding its constitutional limits. And they tried to do something about it. And Lincoln decided, we're just going to go on down and give them what for. They're not allowed to just leave. So he whipped up the issue of slavery and lied the Union into a war of conquest. And Lincoln himself had written that if he could have saved the Union without freeing the slaves, he would have done that as well. All right, let's take a phone call. Mo in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. I hope I'm not too off topic, but it kind of involves Trump. I wonder if you remember, we're about the same age. I know I have your condolences.
Yes.
But back in, I'm a year older than you, so I don't feel sorry. I'm not going to feel sorry for you. You're my younger brother.
Oh, okay.
A lot smarter younger brother, but, you know. But back there in 75, I don't know if you remember this with, I think it was Church and Tower. They had that. They showed that CIA poison dart gun that could give somebody cancer or a heart attack.
Yes.
Remember that?
I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was like 40-something, over 40 years ago. And I was just thinking that, you know, everything from Chavez to all these South American leaders, and Aaron Russo even said that he got a fast-acting cancer all of a sudden after he exposed the Rockefeller.
Yeah, it can happen. Stay on the line. I'm gonna hold you over into hour number 3. Okay. So
okay.
We'll be right back after station identification.
All right.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking with Mo in Florida about the secret history of assassination devices, and I remember reading about a lot of these things, seeing a lot of these things, and Jack Ruby, when he was in jail after shooting Lee Harvey Oswald, came down with a very sudden, very aggressive cancer. And he was telling people that right after his imprisonment, some guys had come on in and held him down while somebody shot him with a needle. And he was convinced that's where he got the cancer from. It is very easy to induce cancers and leukemias on people. No, I'm not going to tell you how, so deal with it. Anyway, Mo, the possibility that these Russian ambassadors are being assassinated by covert means, obviously the one 8 months ago wasn't very covert. He was simply shot dead.
Well, I guess I'll be quick here because I got other callers. This was back in 75, and they had this thing could shoot a dart, I'm reading, the width of a human hair, and a quarter-inch long, could penetrate clothing, was almost undetectable, left no trace. They couldn't even hardly feel it. And that was back in 75. My only question is that I just amazed, if they really wanted to take Trump out with his age, hey, he's older than us, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they would take him out any time with all these swamp creatures around him. He can't be that protective. He could be. This thing's advanced so far since then that he could give him a fast-acting cancer anytime they want. So, in my opinion, and this is why I'm asking you to get your opinion on, is they must not want to take him out.
Well, first of all, you're making an assumption that the CIA can walk into the Oval Office carrying this device. And with 2 layers of security, the Secret Service Protective Detail and Trump's private security detail, that's simply not going to happen. That dart gun has a very limited range. You have to be within like 5 feet of your target to use it, and obviously it's going to be visible. As I understand, well, I don't want to go into the details of what was inside that gun, but it's not something that's going to lend itself to miniaturization all that much. Again,
that was over 40 years ago, Mike, and Bob Marley put on a sneaker. It had a little wire in it. I don't know. I'm not trying to give anybody. Of course, it doesn't matter what I think. I'm just saying in my opinion, I don't think they really want to take him out. Otherwise, they would, because that's 43 years ago. And the technology right now with nanotechnology and everything would make it so, I mean, come on, Moore's Law, right?
Well, let me ask you something else here. What do you think would happen in the streets of America if President Trump was assassinated, which is what you're talking about here? I think that could trigger a real civil war. Nobody's going to believe the official line on how Trump died because we've been lied to so many times, and we've had all these liberal Democrats and even the corporate media screaming for months about how we need to assassinate Donald Trump. If it actually happens, the American people are going to start going after those people who were calling for assassination, with tar and feathers.
Yeah, but 71 years old, cancer, fast-moving cancer. People
I wouldn't believe it.
Like you,
I wouldn't believe it.
I wouldn't believe it.
I wouldn't believe it in a
too,
second.
Sure.
Be just like 9/11. I switched on I got awakened by a phone call from somebody saying turn on the TV, and I turn on the TV. The building's coming down, and I'm looking at it and saying government op, definitely government op. Same thing if something happens to Donald Trump at this point.
Yeah, but we're the minority, Mike. I mean, you woke a lot of people up. You have, but I think 90% of people are still asleep. They would just think his age. I'm just saying that.
Well,
I'll let you go,
look at the percentage of Americans are now aware that John F. Kennedy was in fact the victim of a conspiracy. More than half. And it took a long time to get there, but again, these days people are just much more aware. I think the reason we're not seeing something like this is just fear on the part of the deep state that it could in fact trigger a mass uprising of the American people against every politician, against every banker, against every corporate media.
They're already saying he has, Mike, they're already saying he has dementia. They could give somebody dementia too.
They're just saying it. They're just saying it. They're casting around for something that the American people will buy into, and no, we're not going to buy into it, especially looking at last year's campaign. If there was anybody up there that had dementia, it was Hillary Clinton. It certainly wasn't Donald Trump.
I'm sure you're optimistic. I want to believe your optimism, but something tells me that it's just too easy with the technology now and the improvements. So, okay, Mike, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll let you go. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Chet in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, thanks for taking my call, and thanks for the fantastic work that you do. Just wanted to say just a couple of things. First of all, I've been woke, if you will, for about 3 or 4 years. I am an African-American who have voted Democratic all my life. But thanks to the information I received from guys like you and a few others, I realize what a mess politics is, and the worst offenders of our Constitution recently has been the Democrats. And when I found out, about the Clintons going back to Arkansas and Vince Foster and the recent stuff in 2016, the revelations about the server and all this and the pay-for-play, I just could not vote for Hillary and thought I would vote for no one. But then Trump's message, America First, it resonated with me. I love America. And like you, a little disappointed at the route he has taken. This last speech, I don't know if it's the very last one, but the one where he talked about basically the troop increase without saying it, was a little disheartening as well, and he's probably been co-opted. But we did have a little hope for a while, and who knows, maybe he'll wake up and, get back to business. But this deal with the statues and all this, the Soros-funded people and, the mass media, they're trying to pull black folks into this mess, quagmire, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm encouraging, sensible people to stay out of this because it really is a contrived issue.
Mm-hmm.
The statues have been there for 100 years, 150 years. But what was about to happen was that metadata information, I believe, was about to explode and was going to blow the whole Democratic strategy out of the water. And so they needed this diversion, which they got, which developed in about the last 10 days or 14 days. And it's sickening. How everybody has jumped on the bandwagon, and that's the conversation of the day. I say let's get back, to what's really important, and that's, holding our leaders, responsible for their actions. And so I won't stay on too long because I'll talk forever. But I do appreciate let me say the few words that I did, and I just want to say that finally that it is sickening this racial mess they're trying to create.
Yes, it is. But
And,
it's already backfiring because regardless of which side you're on, most Americans are looking at the behavior of these people. They don't want to be identified with them. The Antifa, Black Lives Matter are making black people look bad. The hired actors with the Nazi flags over on the other side are making white people look bad. I think the grassroots is just going to pull on back and relegate these people to the group, to the status of a fringe group, not representative of the general population. And again, it's amazing that they tried to do this because remember all the riots they kicked up following Trump's victory? And they were out there screaming, we're going to resist and everything. And the more they screamed and the more they broke windows and the more they assaulted people, the less and less public sympathy they got. And the same thing is happening here. I don't sympathize with the people on the white side of this argument because of the way they're behaving or the way they're being paid to behave. I don't sympathize with the people on the other side of the argument because of the way they're being paid to behave. It's a very self-destructive approach to trying to fan up civil unrest because the vast majority of the civil population are not captivated. They're not sympathetic to what's going on. They see the violence and they're saying, this is ridiculous. And I think the actual numbers are that there is no support for either position in the general population. I think most people just wish they would go away. They're being silly.
And Mike, the only thing that's going to help is for the general population to become more educated. I've learned about the central banks and the IMF and the larger picture, and the fact that there is a faction that want to destroy America. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we're being corrupted through movies, through all kinds of cultural bombardments. Freedoms for this, freedoms every weirdo in the world, and it's taken us away from who we are, what the Constitution states, and we're really going to have to get back to basics, and we're going to have to only do that through education. I mean, that's the route.
Yeah.
You have to be informed, and that's where you come in, and I'm doing my part too. Just today, wife's coworker in distress about this whole mess, and I told her she needs to understand who's behind it. She needs to understand who George Soros is and what his agenda is and what kind of guy he is. When he was a teenager, he turned on his own people, in Russia, and he said he did what he had to do. That gives you a big sample of his character.
And he said he didn't even feel bad about it. I mean, we've got that interview on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com right now. Where Soros was saying, yeah, he helped the Nazis round up Jews, and he doesn't feel bad about it at all, and he made a lot of money off the deal.
Yeah, and so that's a kind of heartless force, that we're dealing with, and it's kind of hard for good people to get into that kind of mindset to even understand. So it's a tough job tough job we have. Because we're all in this team together, and
yes,
we have to do what we can to save this country the best we can, because there is an active force, and there has been, as we know through history, an active force to not only break up the Union, but to curb our power throughout the world, and put us in third world status.
I think it's more a case of the New World Order. Somewhere along the way, to get the one world government, the United States does have to be shattered and brought down. I don't know that we're at that stage yet, because the New World Order still needs the U.S. military might to go on out and bring the rest of the world to heel. But it does seem to be accelerating. Anyway, Chet, we're going to let you go here. We're going to do a quick shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network, and we're going to go right back to the phones to Keith in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey. Well, I've been trying to pick on you on Skype, but you won't answer. But anyway, I sent you some good articles. One is on New York Times, an 1860s article about Cuba. And we're back to the same issue of slavery and stuff, how it was used to basically take over Cuba's commonwealth. And but what I actually called for, Mike, was this. We have a government that allows Israel to do what it wants in Gaza, to let the Saudis do what it wants in Yemen. And as a flashback, they have allocated the use of drones in America. Those in power will do anything. They don't care how many people they kill, destroy, whatever, to push their agenda. And that's the real issue here is, like, Trump couldn't drain the swamp fast enough, and apparently it's been plugged. And this entire scenario that we see today is that deep state. And as you had mentioned in your other previous caller, that thing about the data, the metadata, this may be the entire portion behind that, is that people that are in those dark realms of that deep state see their exposure coming more and more, and yet we still see the divisions here. And to pardon the word trumping, but they are trumping the actual legal issues behind those people that should be quislings, that should be in jail.
Yes.
For their crimes.
Absolutely. And it's all about control and power. And yes, we have seen in past history where tyrannical regimes are willing to see huge segments of their population destroyed as long as it makes the survivors obedient slaves afterwards.
Right. You know, one other thing, Mike, I think Twitter was one of the best inventions there for people around the world to be able to share their news stories and instant videos and stuff. But when you see the wonderful black people in our country here, a lot of them that I grew up with, that era, they've realized that this is not a racial thing. This is intentionally trying to divide people.
Yes.
Because we all used to work and play and have fun together. They got over all the stuff in the past. And the premise of removing statues and whatever, well, if you remove that past, then there's no way to fall back on it and say, well, you guys did this. Well, what? Show me. All the history's gone.
Yeah. If you erase history, then you're basically inviting it to happen all over again.
That's exactly it. Anyway, I sent you a couple of good news articles, too, okay? But anyway, my best to you and Claire, okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot. And, yes, I do see them in my inbox. And obviously, because I use Skype to communicate with RBN, I can't accept a Skype contact during the show here. All right, next phone call, Jim in Portland. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was listening to your show yesterday. You were talking about Teslas.
Yes.
Those batteries, the batteries in those cars will never be able to be charged as fast as you were talking about. It's just the chemistry, and it would destroy them. And,
no, I understand that, but they're talking about developing a new battery with new chemistry that could take a charge much more quickly. I mean, think about an electrolytic capacitor. How quickly that can be charged. And then you can drain it off through a resistance bridge. And basically think along that line, an approach like that would actually work.
Right, but these cars, and also you've got to think about also coming upon a supercharger station where there's a line. Over the weekend, a lot of people got a rude awakening about their electric car when they pulled up to these chargers. They had nowhere else to go, and they're out of a charge, and they needed a charge, and there's a 3-hour line just to get to the plug. So a 45-minute charge became a 4-hour charge.
Why didn't they charge them at home?
Yeah, they've taken road trips. These cars were sold with the idea that you could just stop anytime you wanted at one of these supercharger locations and top up.
Well,
But
you just have to program the supercharger locations into your GPS mapping system. I mean, this is a transitional technology, and nobody says it's going to be easy right at the start. And again, the example I was using from yesterday is when internal combustion engine automobiles first came along. It was very difficult to find spare tires or oil or gas. You'd have to go to a hardware store and get the gas in a bucket, pour it into the tank there. It was an inevitable transition to get the infrastructure in place to support this. But in time, it will happen. And because the charging time on the battery is a major issue, at some point it will be solved. That's how these things happen. And again, look at the evolution of the automobile. Where, there were problems with the early automobiles, and eventually somebody said they can be made better by doing this.
People should just keep that in mind, though, because, if you've got a couple kids fighting in the back and your wife's coming down with the flu, the last thing you want to do on a trip is all of a sudden be delayed for 3 hours.
Okay, Jim, I understand that you don't like the Tesla. I disagree with you. I think it is a coming thing here. The only hole in the process is that we need to get the electricity from a non-petroleum source generating station. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, let's get back to the news here. And let's see. Saudi-led airstrikes killed 41 people, including 30 civilians in Yemen. They're killing more civilians than actual combatants. And they're killing children. And one of the real problems we're starting to see is how the U.S. government is trying to normalize the idea of bombing civilian areas, even though that's considered a war crime. Now, apparently over in Raqqa, witnesses are saying that a U.S.-led coalition strike directly targeted civilians in a residential area. Children were playing outside. No warning at all. Now, this leads to a very, very good question from Journal Neo. Is there, in fact, any difference between those who are victims of terrorist attacks and U.S.-led air raids? And certainly from the point of view of those on the receiving end, I can't see that there's any difference at all. But it is amazing to see the corporate media just cry those big crocodile tears when there's a Barcelona or something like that. And then when we get these reports about the thousands upon thousands of civilians being killed by the United States government, cost of doing business. Apparently Rachel Maddow is already out there just drooling over all the wealth we're going to get from Afghanistan. Moscow is getting ready to prepare for a response as the U.S. hits Russians with more sanctions over North Korea. And basically, yesterday, the Treasury revealed it had imposed sanctions on 16 Russian and Chinese nationals and companies for their alleged dealings with North Korea. And both Russia and China are saying, why are you punishing us and causing us harm over North Korea? Being recklessly applied here. Apparently, tensions between the U.S. and North Korea are on the rise again. There was a UN conference on disarmament, and the U.S. disarmament ambassador Robert Wood was out there screaming about the growing threat of North Korea, saying we will use the full range of capabilities to deal with North Korea. So we know who the warmongers really are here. Now, you know these United States-South Korea military drills that are taking place off the coast of the Koreas right now? For the first time ever, they include drilling a scenario for a nuclear exchange. They're practicing playing with the big bombs. And that is going to ramp things up for North Korea here. According to Sputnik News, the U.S. is planning to send 100 additional F-35 Joint Strike Fighters to the Korean Peninsula to support allies in South Korea and Japan against the nuclear and ballistic missile threat posed by North Korea. That's assuming they don't crash first. And I can't imagine that South Korea and Japan are that reassured by the F-35s, given their poor performance. Meanwhile, North Korea is out there still saying that if the United States attempts any kind of a military action in North Korea, whether it's an invasion or a decapitation strike, North Korea is prepared to launch an attack on Guam. So this is as close as you can get. And we've got all these hotheads out there thumping their chests. The silverbacks are at battle again. They're thumping their chests. Woo! I'm bigger than you are. It's going to be amazing here. Meanwhile, over in China, their state media is saying that the U.S. Navy is becoming a dangerous obstacle in the South China Sea. And they're pointing to the recent incidences of the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain as indicating that all these warships that the U.S. is sailing around their islands represent a serious danger to navigation. And it does make sense. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And China is raising a very good point about U.S. military ships in their territorial waters around those South China Sea islands. They're a danger to navigation, and they're pointing to the 4 incidents in a little over the last year as an illustration. There is something wrong with the U.S. Navy, and apparently the U.S. Navy is effectively agreeing. They've already relieved of duty the entire command crew for the Fitzgerald, and apparently they've removed the commander of the entire 7th Fleet after the McCain collision. So, yeah, there's an issue there, definitely. And China is correct. They're dangerous vessels to have around. They're a menace to civilian navigation. All right, let's take a phone call. Rick in Winnipeg, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Aloha to all my American brothers and sisters. The fellow who was killed... he wasn't the vice president. The guy in the Clinton administration who they found in Fort Marcy Park.
Vincent Foster.
The name, yes. Okay, did you ever just, when researching it, or the fellow who was the witness, he was harassed?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I saw a thing from 60 Minutes, and he was like walking down the street with his girlfriend, and there were probably Secret Service guys whispering into their wrists and really harassing him. I kind of felt sorry for the guy. I was just wondering if you heard any more about the fella or anything.
Well, the harassment is kind of stopped. At this point, the narcocracy has enough of a lock on the government where they're never going to go back in and acknowledge that Vincent Foster was murdered, let alone who did it, or more to the point, why. And that, of course, gets back to some of the clandestine sources of the Clintons' tremendous wealth. Again, I have a whole section on Vince Foster. That was literally the incident which got me blacklisted out of Hollywood and launched my career as a truth activist. I mean, I didn't actually intend to come down this path. It just sort of happened to me. And I didn't think it would last this long either, but this is apparently what my life is all about now. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff about Vince Foster, and as far as I'm concerned, the case is made. Assassination, another government cover-up. Let's move on to more current events, okay?
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Rob in Illinois. Aloha, Rob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Mike. Lately, we've been talking about the Confederate flag and, all this Confederate monuments and stuff. This really got a good push start, and it wasn't the first time, but Nikki Haley really kickstarted it, revamped it back in the summer of 2015, going back to Dylan Roof when she makes commentary where she was thumbing through Dylan Roof photos and found him posing with a Confederate flag. And then she associated that with the Dylan Roof case, saying how this was a representation of racism and hate and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Through that, I was reading through the articles, and then Nikki Haley states, you're not born with hate, you are taught hate. So essentially what she's saying is, she's just described us that all these people that are BLM, Antifa, yelling out racist and this and that, they have been taught hate. They've literally been taught this to do what they're doing. So going on from there, right now they're not touching the Albert Pike statue, which I'm sure 33-degree Mason.
Yes.
Stands there in Washington, D.C. There's been controversy with that statue going all the way back to 1993, where they introduced a bill trying to associate Albert Pike with the KKK as a memorial statue. But for 24 years now, it still stands. Now, the first real attack on that, I read just recently because I punched it up, was 5 days ago. They actually did throw paint on it like 5 days ago.
Yeah.
But that statue still stands and will stand because, guess what? He's a 33-degree Mason, and most of what the Masons practice, their rituals and their ceremonies, Mr. Albert Pike has developed. Going on from there, the other statue is the Judah P. Benjamin,
yes,
who was in the Confederacy, and I'm going over, I'm sure is Jewish. He was I don't know, help me out here. Judah P. Benjamin was with the Confederate Army. He ended up in the end abandoning the Confederacy and stealing all their gold. What brought down the South's war because they were defunded. And then he ran off to England, and he was associated with the Rothschilds and so on. But that statue has not been touched, which is 10 miles southeast of New Orleans, standing outside of the library. Another interesting point, did you see the article where it was I was going through Drudge, that Confederate sales have gone up, Confederate flag sales have gone up with the last manufacturer of Confederate flags?
I would not at all be surprised. It's the banned in Boston effect, and even though obviously my personal family ancestry was with the Union, I'm starting to think maybe I want one of those things as well, just to make a point.
We grew up with Dukes. Well, you're a little bit older than I am, but I grew up with Dukes of Hazzard. You know how they pretty much canceled. They banned Dukes of Hazzard off TV, right?
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I'm a 70s child. In the 80s, I used to every Friday night I was watching Dukes of Hazzard at 7 p.m. And then I'd go out with my friends. But I stood home to watch the Dukes of Hazzard, and then I'd go out with my friends.
Yes.
That never made me. The Dukes of Hazzard never made me want to be hateful. It never wanted me to commit crime. It never wanted me to, be against or prejudice against anyone. It actually made me want to get a hot rod and be a good old boy. You know what I mean?
And have a hot babe hanging around you. That's
absolutely right.
Yep.
Daisy Dukes, right?
Yep.
No, but yet it's banned, even though it was pretty much an innocent show, or even though they jumped a shark in the end. I remember one of the last episodes I ever saw the Dukes of Hazzard, they introduced a UFO. Where there was a UFO sighting.
Yeah, that was that show's Jump the Shark moment. I mean, basically the producers of that show, the reason they were able to do what they did is they literally found a city that was getting ready to do a complete overhaul of their police department, and they were selling all their existing police cars in a single lump at a really bargain basement price, and that's where they got all these cop cars that they could wreck episode after episode after episode. But after watching episodes of police cars get wrecked, and let's be honest, it was kind of a video TV attempt at copying what was that Burt Reynolds movie and Sally Fields, the one about the rum running.
Smokey and the Bandit.
Smokey and the Bandit. Yeah, that's basically what it was. It was inspired by Smokey and the Bandit. And, of course, when they started running out of that stock of very cheap police cars, they started having to get a little more creative, and eventually the show ran out of story content.
Well, they switched characters in the end after the actors. I don't want to talk about Dukes of Hazzard, but they switched characters.
Yeah.
They switched the cast out because they actually wanted royalties, figuring out how much they were making off of the merchandise, and then they switched the characters out to be their cousins and blah blah blah. The show ended. But moving on from there, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I know you know the answer. I know the answer. Who created ISIS?
ISIS appears to be a creation of some U.S. intelligence agency. We know from all the documents that came out of Hillary Clinton's State Department that the U.S. has been covertly arming and funding them. And I think ISIS was created and promoted because Al-Qaeda was getting worn out, and too many people knew that Al-Qaeda was another creation of the U.S. covert state.
You answered 2 questions in a row.
Yeah.
Funding them as well.
Yeah.
Now, what is their purpose there?
Well,
what is their created purpose?
Their original purpose was to be this big, scary monster, so that we would all be afraid and cling to the ankles of Big Daddy government for safety and protection. That really didn't work out too well. Now ISIS is being used as a proxy, where the game plan is the U.S. sends ISIS into a country, and then they say, oh my goodness, ISIS is in this country. We now have a pretext for military action. And they did that in Syria. They're doing it in the Philippines. And they did it in Afghanistan. And that's the new method for U.S. invasion. Oh my goodness, there's the evil ISIS. We have to go on in and blow the place up.
Right, and then throughout this, they don't just stand there and look pretty until the U.S. forces show up and go, oh, there's ISIS, we're battling them. They actually do create, they cause death, they cause violence, they cause destruction throughout. Am I correct?
Well, they certainly do in front of the media cameras. That's their job, is to look like this big, horrible, scary monster. But again, they do seem to be serving U.S. foreign policy interests.
Now, that's foreign policy. Now take this domestically. What is an equivalent of ISIS on U.S. domestic soil as we currently speak?
Antifa.
Exactly. Who do you and who's funding them?
Well, we know
where are they getting their marching orders, their agenda, and so on?
They're getting some of it from George Soros.
Some from George Soros, and George Soros gets grants from the government, and George Soros funds all these other organizations, and and they get their marching orders. So, and follow me here. See Antifa as a domestic, I'm going to be loose on the word terrorist, but a domestic organization creating havoc and violence, and they're hurting people, they're hurting women, they're hurting elderly, they're damaging property, creating this chaos, demoralization, and so on.
Yes.
On domestic soil. Do you also see this as a step-by-step process into what ISIS does?
It could very well go there. I wouldn't hesitate to use the word terrorists in conversations, not just about Antifa, but even Black Lives Matter. Because a terrorist, under the definitions established by the USA Patriot Act, the use of force or the threat of force to coerce a change in politics is legally defined as an act of terror. So when you have these people who are out there with their baseball bats saying, you'll be a racist, we're going to take the statue down, that's an act of terror, legally. And I'm still waiting for the White House to respond to that petition, which apparently has soared way over the minimum number of signatures required.
Well, last night it was 215,000 and counting.
Yeah.
So, Mike, this stuff is not just about, it's not about statues or whatever. This is literally about erasing America's identity completely, because basically they want to invade. They want to create a new nation under, I don't want to put labels on it.
I don't know. I'm not sure yet. Let me interrupt here because we're running out of time here. I'm not sure we know what their agenda is right now. I think it is foolish to assume that the agenda being served by ISIS in other countries is going to be the same throughout those countries or the same as Antifa here. Certainly civil unrest appears to be a major goal here, and even the United Nations is saying that they're concerned that there is going to be civil unrest here in the United States of America. And maybe that's what they want, declare national emergency, suspend the Bill of Rights, shut down the independent media, or again, playing the race card, as they were out there saying earlier. They want to make people ashamed to vote GOP next year.
I'll end it with this for now, but the first thing these invaders when they go into these countries and they take over the government and whatnot, the first thing they do is tear down their statues and their identity. Their statues, their monuments, their leaders, and of course, harass and create havoc out in the public. So that is what's happening here in a more subtle manner. There's no bullets flying, but they're doing it in another manner until until something changes.
Okay.
I'll let you go. I appreciate the conversation.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And before we take another phone call, I got an interesting email from somebody who appears to be very knowledgeable on the subject of battery technology. And apparently there is something out there that's brand new. It's called aluminum ion batteries, and a cell can be fully charged in 1 minute. It has 10 times the energy delivery rate of lithium cells. Now, it's still in a very early stage of development, and it's heavier than an equivalent lithium battery, but I'm sure they'll be able to engineer that down. And apparently the real advance in this technology is the electrodes are made of graphite foam, which allow the ions to pass through the cell at a much higher rate. And there's the open door to a rapidly recharged electrical car. So good for them. All right, back to the phones here. Apostle in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Mike, I know you're very big with NASA and astronomy, but I just want to let you know the mainstream media lied to you.
Okay, imagine my shock.
Well, I have an inside, whatever, from in the DNC, whatever. It really wasn't a lunar eclipse. It was Putin's Death Star that happened to go across the sun, and that's what you witnessed.
I thought you were going to tell me that Putin hacked the sun.
No, he didn't hack it, whatever. That was his Death Star
that went
across
Star
there, whatever. It wasn't anything, but this is what the Democrats... this is what the Democrats want you to know.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate the input, and thank you very much. We're going to take one more phone call. Then we're going to close the lines because I got a bunch more stuff. I'm way behind on the talking points. David in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I was just having a thought when you were talking to, I think it was a caller before the last one.
Yes.
Is it possible that Antifa is the same as putting all the Muslims into Europe, but knowing that the United States wouldn't take that, so they created their own Antifa here in the States? Just a thought that I had.
Well, most of Antifa, first of all, you have to subtract out the ones who are being paid to be there and be the ringleaders. Most of what remains appear to be U.S. citizens, disaffected, easy to exploit, and I'm not seeing a tremendous amount of overlap between Antifa and the migrants coming on in. I think the migrants are probably going to stay away from that kind of a situation out of concern that they could be deported.
Yeah, but that's why they created the Antifa in the United States, so that they couldn't do that. More of a homegrown invasion kind of thing. Well, it was just about it.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm not seeing it, but thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to close the phone lines here, and I'm going to get back and get some news done before the end of the program. Now, the Pentagon has just awarded some major contracts to Boeing and Grumman for a new generation of intercontinental ballistic missiles. They want to basically replace the arsenal of Minuteman III missiles. They're 45 years old. It's time to get new ones with chrome and all this other stuff. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Last segment of our program today, and we're talking about how the Pentagon has awarded contracts to Boeing and Grumman for the next generation land-based ICBM. And they're talking about how the Minuteman III is 45 years old, which technically is true until you remember that it is always being updated, repaired, upgrades. You know, it's not like it's just been sitting in the silo for 45 years, but they want a complete new replacement. There are right now about 450 Minuteman IIIs in service. It did peak at 1,000 earlier in its career, and the program is expected to cost a total of $85 billion. Now, not everybody is happy that the U.S. is out there wagging its nuclear missiles around anymore. And Martin Schulz, who's head of Germany's Social Democrat Party, and he's running against Angela Merkel in this next election, is saying if he wins, if he defeats Angela Merkel in the next election, he is going to tell the United States to remove all of their nuclear warheads from Germany. Because while they're there, Germany is inevitably a target in the event of a Russian-United States nuclear exchange. And they don't want to be that. Okay, now then, getting into the economic news. Boy, I was way, way behind in the talking points here a little bit. All right, let's get into the computer stuff here a little bit. The FBI is reportedly advising companies to ditch Kaspersky applications, and the U.S. Defense Department drops Kaspersky from all their related electronics, which is kind of weird. I think it's one of the best products out there. And certainly being a Russian company is the least likely to be compromised by U.S. intelligence agencies. If you're buying computer security software that's created inside the United States, there's a guarantee there's a back door in it. All right, now then. Apparently, there's a new phishing scam out there, and we know because we got hit with it here. And apparently what they're doing is they're spoofing a number that's very close to your own number. And so people will look at it and say, oh, this must be somebody in the neighborhood, somebody I know. And they're more likely to answer it, which starts the process of trying to lure them in to what is essentially a phishing attack. Meanwhile, over at AccuWeather, their iPhone app, users are dumping it after learning that it has been sending location data of where you are to a third party. People are getting very, very sensitive and touchy about their privacy, and they should be. We have a right to privacy. If we're minding our own business and we're not doing anything wrong, the government has no business spying on us. That's in that Bill of Rights. And when the government ignores that Bill of Rights, it ceases being the legal, legitimate government. Okay, there's the music. Got to head on out of here. Got a bunch of stuff I got to get done this afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow here on Republic Broadcasting. And meanwhile, stay tuned for John Stedmiller's program. He's got a lot of stuff to share with you. Take what you learn here and share it with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.